I can't find good talent, it is 1,000% a you problem. You are it up. My name is Dean, better known as Dr. Zoidberg. I have been in the MSP industry for well over a decade. Have you ever been to a Disney property? Did you ever bother to realize they actually tell you no a lot more than they say yes? But the way they tell you no is by always a lot of these people they don't know what they're doing in this space. It's really, really, really entertaining to me as an MSP to see that. Because it's like, how do you not realize how out of touch you are with the people trying to sell to? It's SOP and the SLA together. In an example like McDonald's, same SOP for so long by enough generation of consumers. All of us have a general idea of what reasonable operation looks like. Uncommon situation where you are waiting a little long in the drive-thru, where the SLA is being breached, you are able yourself to sort of filter that breach through the reasonableness. They probably can't follow their SOP today because of condition. Well, think about an MSP, like we don't have that.
Welcome to this episode of MSP Insider. I am super grateful to be bringing you perhaps the spiciest episode yet. We'll find out. We have the man, the myth, the legend in the house. So to open up the show, please, Dean, tell me who you are, what you do, and why the hell did you do it?
Sure. So my name is Dean, otherwise known, probably better known as Dr. Zoidberg. I have been in the MSP industry for well over a decade in a service and operations role at every size MSP, switched over to the vendor side. I do a lot of advising. I have seen it all. I have worked for a lot of entrepreneurs. I am not an entrepreneur, so I see right through the bullshit. And I created Spicy Monday, which has been really cool to see, something that lots of people have been taking. I was really excited when I first heard about your show because that was the same reason that I created Spicy Monday. So very excited that I'm actually talking to you today.
Yeah, to me, similarly in that I came from MSP, right? I spent so much time, 18 years, but on that side of the curtain as like the consumer of what the channel had to offer.
Yeah.
And I was in the buyer seat for so long on whether it was tools or ideology or anything. And it was so fucking exhausting. We'll just go straight to it, right? I'll rip the Band-Aid off and open the show that way.
All right.
To be in that seat as the buyer, needing to make these critical, pivotal decisions for the MSP, like that had ripple effects that went across 40 to 125 person orgs. And like nothing mattered after the contract was signed. Right. So like I'm already going too far down into some of the topics, which we'll get back into, but I can't tee it up too quick without starting off the show appropriately. So to do that, the way that we do that is the prior guest on the show actually left a question behind to start the conversation for you. And so the guest that was on the show before was Ron Lasevsky. He's a coach and consultant for Pax8 Academy, but also does scaling up coaching on his own as well. And the question that he had for the next guest, which is you, is if you could pick anybody, current or former, alive or dead, to be your business mentor, who would it be?
So this is a really funny answer, given where he works. Dave Shaffron over at Pax8 Academy, formerly of C-Level.
Yeah.
Probably the smartest single business human I have ever encountered in my entire career in this industry. Yeah,
that's funny you mentioned him too. He was the one that I went through in order to bring Pax8 Academy on as well. And I would agree, just a brilliant mind, but like in such a way that the intelligence matches the real world piece. And so it's super relatable and as a result, digestible. And because it's digestible, then executable. So that's a great answer. All right, so let's dive straight into perhaps where the heat needs to be the most, since I kind of already led that a little bit, right? We were talking through this lens of kind of seeing both sides of the aisle. You've been in MSP, you've been in vendor, you've been advising for vendors. Like the world that we have lived in, and this is great because it's one of the pet peeves, right? If we think about the event-driven ecosystem, and this is even more near and dear to my heart now because it's January 25, and I had to plan out what's our conference schedule for this year over in the last couple of weeks. But as we think about events and the overabundance of them, you know, what is you have this interesting and maybe perhaps, interesting. You have an interesting relationship with events and the way in which they've evolved. Talk to me a bit about the bizarre kind of anti-vendor stance at conferences, even though they're dependent on the vendors that show up to pay for them. Let's just go straight into it.
Well, to like kind of introduce that idea, I was fortunate enough in my career that from my very first day in an MSP, I worked for a small MSP that grew where the owner already went to events
Mm-hmm.
and brought me to them. So I had a lot of exposure as an employee. I would say an atypical amount compared to even a large MSP with a lot of staff. So I grew up there. I grew up going to nearly every event, peer group, industry association. If there is some way to pay to learn something, I have done it likely.
Mm-hmm.
And having gone through all of that as a consumer for so long and really learning how it worked, it was hilarious to me when I switched sides to see how completely out of touch
Mm.
the vendor space is with events. But then when I got, which we could totally go down a side tangent about, but when I got past that and I was like, okay, cool. Well, I know events, and started to try to approach it as a vendor from the same way I approached it as an MSP.
Mm.
A lot of these events pretty much like get fucked. No, absolutely not. Like I'll give a good example. I'll get you your first cease and desist. Write a Boom that's coming up soon. A beloved event by MSPs. Probably I would say of the yearly event cycle, one of the top two most cherished MSP events that can do no wrong is incredibly unfriendly to vendors. Not because Andrew's an unfriendly guy, just the setup is unfriendly to vendors. And it's a security event. It's an education event. Well, Jeff, you have employees.
Mm-hmm.
You make a product that if it was insecure or coded or developed in a non-best practice way could really damage a lot of employees and a lot of MSPs.
Yeah.
Can you send your staff there, especially if you're not sponsoring? The answer is no. And if you're caught doing that, you'll be banned from going back. I don't understand that. And that's where this all originally came from. Like having been an MSP where the whole point of going to these, the whole value proposition is to learn, to network, to grow, get your staff better at things, get new ideas, bounce ideas off your peers, and then maybe also buy something.
Right.
Well, all of the vendors in our space, of which there are more and more of, they have employees and staff that code, support, program, do account management, sales, all the things MSPs do for MSPs. And they can't send their staff to these events or consume these events the same way the MSPs would because the industry feels that that's inappropriate or unacceptable, or you have to sponsor. And as a startup, right?
Yeah.
You have enough money to sponsor everything? No, of course not. You probably had to pick like a very small amount of things and then get scrappy.
Right.
And even a big vendor, like a huge vendor in our channel, like I don't know, like a Huntress or something, like, yeah, they got more money. They can be at more stuff, but not to send their staff to go and learn.
Right.
The whole thing, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's like the economics are broken in the situation. We can go down that rabbit hole, but I also agree with you how there's like this keeping your ICP beyond an arm's length away from the direct exposure of the people that need to feel and see and understand what the hell MSPs, like how they think and how they interact, and especially in an ecosystem where it's supposed to be all of them, right? I think kind of going back to maybe where I was intended at the opening of the show is like being in that buyer seat, working with vendors, trying to execute the best decision for the company, which really meant executing the best decision to deliver the best experience to my end users, meaning my customers. Like most vendors fell flat. And I tell them all the time when I was talking to them, like, your solution creates one or more additional problems in my world, and I need you to solve through that. Like, I'll tell you what they are, and I'll even tell you how to fix them or how I would like it to be fixed as an MSP. But like, don't sell me this magical golden thing and then just ignore the fact after the contract's been signed and we've implemented it or we're trying to implement it and we can't. Like the whole the Vaseline covered bowling ball you just put in my arms, basically, right? Like you gave me more problems than I have or had before I actually adopted the product. And why I think that might be tangentially related to what we're talking about here is like, well, would that be different if more people on the vendor side actually truly understood what it was like to be in the seat of the MSP? And then how would they do that if they can't?
You hit the nail on the head. And if you think about it, so like this industry is very entrepreneurial driven to begin with, and it likely will be for a while. An MSP typically starts, right? Not because you want to run a business, because you're good at computers and you want to make money from it and you sort of become a business owner. But an MSP has the advantage in this case. It's a commodity. Sorry, it's a commodity. Yeah. And so people need someone to fix their computers the same way I need somebody to replace my water heater or build a house. Like, so there is an inherent need for the labor an MSP provides. So if I'm bad at everything else, which most MSPs are bad at their value proposition and what they do, I can fall back on that and I will still have customers that buy from me.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work when you're making a SaaS product. And it's hilarious how many times I see people, they come up with basically, they're a solution looking for a problem. They come up with a really, really creative idea that solves a problem that either they and only they had, or they have no idea what problem it solves. It's just cool.
Yeah.
And they rush to market. They have no idea the actual business problems they're solving. They have no idea how to do whatever they're solving. This is one of my critiques against products in your category. They have no idea how to do whatever your product's doing without the product.
Yeah.
They run into the market like excited. Look what I built. A couple of people buy. They have no idea how to train their own stuff. Not that I expect like a BDR or sales rep to be an expert on an MSP, but they have no idea how to teach them to even get halfway there. And we end up with now hundreds of vendors that have probably built a really cool feature that don't really know what it does, don't really know how to use it, don't really know how I get any value from it. Right. And so they don't know how to sell it. And what becomes a crutch to that? Well, if I get enough time, think about this like a technical employee. What would be the technical excuse? How would I differentiate from a sysadmin in an internal IT department? Well, they've got all day to figure it out. I work at an MSP. I only got a half hour. We use that to hold ourselves up. Well, think about that. Same thing with sales. Like if I can get you in front of me for 30 minutes at a booth, I can probably fumble my way through a conversation where I get you to buy from me and make up for the fact that I have no idea what my product actually really does for you. So events become now a crutch for a lot of these vendors. And you add in a couple other psychological elements about being part of a group and, you know, your friends and sort of the scene. And if you're not seen, that's a big deal. And it creates this self-perpetuating cycle where now I have to go to events. I don't really know why. I don't know that I get an ROI, but it is the only thing I get an ROI on because I certainly have no idea what I'm doing, you know, otherwise with marketing. And then you get this defensiveness that builds from that makes some of these vendors feel that the list, the experience at the show that they paid for, they need to protect that, which rationally I understand, but it practically should be irrelevant.
Yeah.
And that pushes us to this area now where a subset of the vendor space is pushing these events to not allow, you know, vendor employees there. And we arrive at this bizarre situation where we have an oversaturation of events. We have an oversaturation of vendors spam attending these events with no real idea why they're there or what they're doing. The people who are representing the vendors are not really able to speak on MSP. And they're all weirdly defensive of all of that with knives out. So if you wanted to show up with your team, heaven forbid anyone there recognized that SIF showed up as attendees. They're probably scraping leads. And then we use the excuse of a handful of small, very shitty vendors who do that to be like, well, see, we can't let anyone in, which is ridiculous. And it's this whole perpetuating thing that does really come back to the problem statement that you brought up. A lot of these people they don't know what they're doing in this space. It's really, really, really entertaining to me as an MSP to see that. Cause it's like, how do you not realize how out of touch you are with the people that you're selling to sell to? Yeah.
It's so wild, right? And like going back, and I know that you have experience in the sales and the marketing and like the positioning components of that too. So you get it. And you were successful in the growth of highly successful, even by the numbers.
I'm not a sales guy. I'm an ops guy. I'm not a sales guy at all.
But you know how to communicate with people. That's actually, let's actually tie the knot there. Cause that's a good salty point between a lot of MSPs, sales and ops, right? It's the same in a lot of businesses, but specifically in MSP, like there's the Great Wall of China that exists between it, right? I used to say this, like I had to sort of rebuild an entire culture at one of the MSPs to what I called a culture of winning. And what that meant was when the sales team came back with a contract in hand and we walked into the knock and celebrated, did everyone celebrate or did they just go, oh, like they sink in their chair, their gut gets torn out, like they just got kicked, right? And I never understood. I mean, I did, but it was just a lack of clarity and a lack of awareness between the two parts of the organization where it was like, guys, this is something worth celebrating. Like the clients are the only reason that we exist. We're a service business, not a tech company. and helping these people is the thing that gets your paycheck in your account and not theirs. So like but the culture of winning was so important, and you had to like really break that down and like recreate it, especially when it was gone. And yet what I came to find, because my transition was I was a tech person for the first 10 years until I moved to sales through the account management vein. And at the end of the day, like it was all people on both sides of the aisle every time. Like it was a service business, it was a people business, it was a human capital business, it was a trust and a relationship business. But there's a big kind of siloed separation or something to that effect between ops and sales. So that was too long of a monologue to really preface a question, but like back to your point, right? You're an ops guy and a process guy, and yet those things are so fundamentally critical to growth as well, right? Because you can't, it's like a sandcastle. If you didn't have that stuff in place, the structure, then you just build up this pretty little sandcastle of net new clients until you outgrew your ability to execute it, and then it would just kind of fall back down to its state of equilibrium, and you build it back up and down. So like, what was your biggest takeaway? And maybe it's more than one. Is there like a 3-part framework to orchestrate the dance between those two parts of the org for someone who's experiencing that, like they don't have a culture of winning, they have a culture of fuck you, get out of here, currently?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a very easy thing to solve for in terms of the intellectual leaps you need to make. It's just time consuming. First thing is everybody in the organization actually needs to clearly understand what everyone else does and what rules they're playing by, and when those rules are officially different. And the biggest breakdown, not even an MSP, that you'll see between service ops, delivery, engineering, and sales is always going to be that neither side really understands what the other side's accountability measures are, how they're compensated, and what their rules are. First, let's put that out in the open. So one of the first things we did was we explained that like that hunter sales guy that we brought in that no one really likes hanging out with, because that's part of what makes him a good hunter, who's in and out all the time and works weird hours. Yeah, he probably is going to make, if he does his job right, a bigger salary than anyone in this room. Here's how and why, and then why you should all be happy that's happening. So if he comes to work one day in a Ferrari, it's because he put more, food in our mouths. That's step one. And same thing with the sales guy. It's explaining to them that like these aren't a bunch of angry, internet trolls that sit in the room. Like here are their metrics. Here's what they're held accountable to. The next step is then, well, why does any engineering or service team get mad at sales? We get mad at sales when we feel that sales has gone out of scope, overpromised, or put something together that we feel is not reasonable either on the time frame or with our perception of our capacity or availability. And that happens. But so my counterpoint to that is, well, two departments in an MSP, which one's bigger? Which is the bigger one? Which has more weight? Service side. So simply based on that, who has the bigger burden of having their shit together first? Us. If we can't have a standardized way we do things that's repeatable, that our sales team not only can understand, but feel confident that when they express it isn't bullshit, how can they possibly have the confidence to sell only what we want them to sell? And it's an idea that really escapes a lot of technical minded people in all industries. It is unfair to ask a salesperson to learn how the tech works so that they can somehow magically scope it perfectly every time. That is not tenable. Your operations, you do in that sense, your operations does have to be like a McDonald's. Like, how can I get you to go sell a hamburger if I don't make a repeatable hamburger for you to sell? Otherwise, every time you're in front of a client and they express a hamburger pain point, you're going to think creatively and be like, well, we got ketchup, we got pickles, we got buns. I guess we could make that. And then I come back and I'm like, that's not a hamburger, Jeff. What the hell? Like, I'm going to have to engineer, and you're over there like, what did I do wrong? Like, you didn't tell me what this. So it starts there. And a lot of organizations don't do that. The service and ops team, we don't give our sales team something that is repeatable, defined, and that has a high level of confidence that they can understand and go present. And my spicy comment for anyone here who's not in sales, salespeople are absolutely capable and willing to say no. Absolutely are. The most aggressive hunter that works for you will say no to somebody. Sometimes it's a sales technique if they understand the reason for it, because they also don't want to have their time wasted.
Yeah.
Give them the tools.
Yeah, I love everything you just laid down. And there's a couple of principles that I'm going to read back to you out of my interpretation of it. The first, which I've had several conversations even in the last 3 days on this one word alone, which is clarity, right? Clarity of what and who and how and everything all the way through the org. A really relatable experience, because again, I was on both sides. So when I was the tech person, whether it was a primary engineer on the support desk working, far more hours, feeling like that was the badge of honor, right? Like a 65-hour week was normal by Thursday, right? So like, don't bitch at me kind of the mentality. And then the amount of resentment you would have for, to your point, like the floating sales guy that would just kind of bounce in and out. They were maybe in the office 2 or 3 hours a day, maybe, right? And like the perception. So perception was the other thing I picked up out of that. Like the perception that I had about those roles was wrong. So I was part of the problem, right? When I was on the tech side, before I even understood what the hell happened on the sales side, because they were putting in their own crazy amount of effort, doing their things that needed to be done in order to get the deals in the door and closed to drive the Ferrari. Like the whole thing was a system. And then that was really what the light bulb moment was for me about this like culture of winning that needed to be created. Is like, we can't be at each other's throats because we just made more work for each other. We need to celebrate the shit out of the fact that the company's growing and we're creating opportunity and we're helping customers. So, clarity being one, transparency, and I think accountability to your point about what are they getting measured on? What does success look like for these roles? I think is really important. A clear example of that was like part of what the sales reps that I was frustrated weren't around for were being measured on was how often they weren't around. Right? How many doors are they knocking on? How many hours are they out of the office, not in it? And yet from the service side, looking at that and being like, shit, I'm here 10 hours a day, 12 on a decent one.
Yeah.
Right. But these guys show up for one just to like maybe bring me a coffee or drop a donut on my desk as they handed me some sort of shitty deal. Right. And I think there's just like lack of communication, lack of expectation, lack of one MSP had this core value, and I loved it, was start from a place of trust. And that's really what began building the idea of the culture of winning. Was like, what if that sales guy who just dropped a new contract on me wasn't a bad person and didn't have ill intent and actually was working towards the same thing, even if it turned into more work for me or my team or my coworkers.
Well, and importantly too, if you do all of that, the ability for the entire organization to actually spot and especially a newer employee that does not align with that. So somebody who actually is bad or malicious is much quicker. Everybody right away immediately can sniff it out. Like, this person doesn't fit because there is a way we all treat each other here. And this person is not acting that way. And you can tell it like instantly. And then especially with sales, right? Like, then you don't have the emotion, the ego, that high D personality 6 months out, getting mad. It's much easier. Salespeople put a lot of work into basically generating their list they're going to work. Well, if I let you know your first 30 days in that you're not a fit, like, you're not going to be happy, but at least you didn't put 6 months into building a list you can't take with you and you get mad about. So
I'd love to unpack your experience a bit, specifically on that one problem, because it was something I learned the hard way, which was the problem wasn't solved when I made the decision. The problem was solved in the 90-day preparation work for like the post 90-day execution. Like the measurement of success was 90 days after the decision. But specifically with hiring, is there two-part question? One, did you ever come up with, not even that, I'm currently the MSP owner, let's say less than 20 people, less than 3 million, whatever, like the 80% of the market. And I have a problem and I'm going to solve it with a body. So I'm going to put out a job ad or whatever to hire this person. And I believe that I've solved the problem as soon as I extend the offer letter that's accepted. Let's shatter that person's reality by giving them like a 3-step alternative to how they can actually solve the problem they're trying to solve.
Sure. So that actually may be the solution sometimes. And that's where the first problem breaks down, is we haven't actually defined what we're trying to solve for. It's very easy to think, especially, and I will give some slack to a smaller MSP where 1 or 2 people are wearing a lot of hats It is very easy to initially look at the problem as, I just don't want to wear this hat anymore. I'm sick of working an 80-hour week. And if you're watching this and you're not an owner, a lot of owners of your smaller MSPs, like we're described, they do a shitload of stuff you don't see. Like, whether you think they're good or bad, they're putting a lot of effort in. And so some of this can be fatigue at that size. At an MSP where that's not happening, maybe, we need another role. What do service people always say? If we only had another tech,
Right.
the world, sunshine and rainbows. The challenge with that is, well, in each case, what do you actually mean by that operationally? Are you solving for capacity or availability? Because in both cases, a person could be the solution. And you might be right that just hiring somebody, job's done, I'm good. But in a lot of cases, because we haven't broken it down, we don't know. And it's actually that problem statement I just made is interestingly why the industry has come in with products like SIF to our space, because it's been identified externally in the enterprise space that this availability versus capacity and how we represent this to our end users is kind of a big deal. And getting back on track with that. Yeah. So like at an MSP, if you think of like a technical employee, and I buy 8 hours a day from them, their time is my inventory, I want to resell 8 hours. Well, if I add another employee, I've just added another 8 hours of inventory every day I have to sell. Inventory that has no shelf life. I've added capacity. Was that actually what I wanted? Was I actually saying that I needed 8 more hours of inventory? Was I maybe saying that I don't want customers to ever have to leave a voicemail when they call? Is that what I was saying? Yeah. Was I saying instead that I want to make sure when my sales guy, who I've now given my SLAs to, confidently tells somebody we always respond in 15 minutes, that I have backfill and an extra human there to make sure that statement is true? That often doesn't get broken down in any role. And that's what you have to start with is, am I hiring for capacity or availability? If it's availability, yeah, it's a human. You have to add a human for availability, unless you want to get into availability theater with like an AI chat program, like sitting at the front end, which I don't really think is a good idea for a smaller MSP. But if you're solving for capacity, well, hang on a minute. Do you need 8 extra hours of inventory? Yeah. And in most MSPs, even MSPs that are overburdened, the answer is probably not yes. Or the answer is there's like 20 other ways to solve for that, because then efficiency comes into play. And we start looking at stuff like, is our current process aligned to optimize our capacity? Yeah. Have we exhausted automation, tools, processes to control our capacity? Have we even ever bothered to express how to consume that capacity to our clients? Do our clients know how to consume service from us? All of that has to happen first before you add that person. And we haven't even gotten into how to hire. Like just is the body the solution?
Right. Yeah. There were a handful of things that I picked up in that. One of them that I came to understand and also loathe was like it seemed like it might've been a archetype, characteristic, personality traits. I don't know what it would have been, but it was like the stereotypical MSP individual, because they had the capability to do something, they would often like put it on their shoulders, right? Or put it on their back. Like, oh, I'll just go do it. Instead of buying this thing and doing it, like I can recreate that, or I can do that, or I can, whatever. I have the capability to figure this out. But it was always in direct conflict of the capacity to do it, right? So then you end up in this scenario where MSPs, we talk like the shiny object syndrome. Like, I'm going to change the tool stack because the stack's the most important thing in the world, even though it's not. It's like, okay, so you made this change, but one, you don't have like the discipline to figure out how to your point, like make it a process, operationalize it, install it in the business, all the way to the point where like it's fully deployed and you can action on it, because within 6 months, you're probably going to pick the next thing and move on again. Right. So like, it's just this strange dichotomy maybe, or just maybe it isn't strange and maybe it's just is what it is. That personality type is like the capability versus capacity. And I liked how you positioned even the, what are you specifically solving for?
A good comparison to this, actually a really good comparison to this, is the chef or food enthusiast started restaurant industry. If you go and look over there, restaurants by definition have to balance capacity and availability. It is literally their metric.
Yeah.
And most restaurants that are started by somebody who is in the chef persona go out of business within 10 years. 10 years is a good lifespan for them. So think about that at an MSP. If I told you that an MSP, a good MSP, would go out of business within 10 years. And it's the same problem, because in a restaurant, you have literal capacity in terms of the amount of diners you can have in at any one time, which is directly tied to revenue. You have capacity in terms of your availability to store ingredients to make what's on the menu. If you're a fish restaurant, especially a high-end fish restaurant, you probably can't produce 1,000 swordfish dishes tonight because you quite literally don't have the capacity to get that fish and store it. So it's all about balancing capacity on that side. The kitchen is a capacity metric, but then the whole front of house is availability, because I have to reactively respond to guest surges that I can predict but can't control. And guests are going to judge you based on how well you manage the perception of availability. Everybody cannot be seated simultaneously, assuming everybody in your geography came to dine. It's not possible. And we don't have a 1-to-1 server per table ratio, at least in any real restaurant in North America. So you have to manage availability with servers. You have to manage availability with tables. You have to manage availability potentially in terms of the menu, especially if it's high end and not everything is there. All of that comes together, and it's incredibly challenging to do. And most restaurants fail at that. That's how hard it is. And imagine that industry now turning around and basically saying, these chefs saying, you know, I am not going to bother to learn how to get a electronic solution to manage my seating, plan, and handle reservations, whatever. I'll just do it. And I imagine that chef saying, you know, I'm not going to get a point of sale system and optimize that experience. I'll just do it. And I'm not going to figure out how to manage a limited amount of waiters, waitresses, and bussers. I'll just do it. Well, that's a taco truck. And that doesn't mean you can't have a profit. You can have a very profitable taco truck, but that's a taco truck, right? Like, you cannot do that beyond a taco truck size. But here we have MSPs who are trying to do that at much larger than a taco truck size. And it's this idea, this entrepreneurial idea, typically combined with I am the primary or original craftsperson, that I think tends to lead to that mindset. That chef in a good version of this restaurant might superficially know a little bit about the entirety of the business. I guarantee you, if we pulled in a handful of relatively successful Michelin star chefs in here, they probably don't really know that much about actual operations in their business. They just do what they're told. That's the same thing in an MSP. So now you have a leadership team that got into this because they were passionate about what they do. They have built a business that requires balancing capacity and availability. They know a little bit about business, and I'm not casting shade on any owners that are watching here. I'm sure you've learned a lot over the years, but none of you, for the most part, are experts in anything. I know this because I talk to you. But yet you're going to make decisions on things that require expertise on how to run them. And now we have the problem we talked about at the beginning of the video. There's vendors coming in saying, buy my shiny thing. It'll solve everything. And you know, you have that pain, but you don't know any better. And the whole thing spirals, and you end up with something that can, even at a small MSP, the momentum of that can be so big to get your arms around, to stop. And there's also that lurking sunk cost fallacy in the back of your head that even if you do pick up on this because you watch a show like this, you're like, all right, but man, I've just been doing it this way for so long and it has kind of worked, and I don't want to throw all that away. And that is why we see our version of the restaurant thing. This is why we see so many MSPs will plateau somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 million. And that's it. That's it. They never go any more than that. That is our manifestation of that.
I love that you used the restaurant industry as well as the example for that, because the other thing that I hate to see and yet see proliferated throughout our space is, like, I kind of mentioned it earlier, right? We see ourselves as tech companies, not as service companies. And the ones that do see themselves as service companies that happen to do tech, like, see themselves as service companies and not hospitality companies, right? There's a difference between service and hospitality. The restaurant industry is a great one to use as the example there. Have you seen hospitality done right or done well at an MSP? And if so,
Absolutely.
what's an example of what that looks like?
So this is going to sound kind of cheesy for a minute, but understanding the client experience you're trying to arrive at. And this conversation normally breaks down because our industry is obsessed with saying white glove service.
Yeah.
Because we somehow, especially smaller business owners, started this and it propagated up. We have associated the act of performing the service as being white glove, which, first of all, is not what white glove is. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very affluent area. I'm not affluent, but around affluent people.
Yeah.
I've seen that. If you want this is a funny example I give to people, real white glove, go watch or read classic Batman. When Alfred does this thing where Bruce Wayne is like super focused on something in the Batcave and Alfred ninjas out of nowhere with a tray with whatever Batman needs. And in the comics, especially, Batman is shown to jump. That is white glove service. Alfred anticipated what Bruce needed before Bruce knew he needed it, arrived with it and had it ready before Bruce knew he was there. And Bruce was pretty much literally surprised that, oh shit, exactly what I needed. That's white glove service.
Yeah.
That is not the same as being a high-end service provider. They're not the same thing. And it gets misinterpreted all the freaking time in our space.
Yeah.
To go back to that question that you asked, so MSPs that understand those aren't the same and think about the client experience and can map out, like on a Candyland game board, the total journey of being a client all the way through from start to finish, where they're able at any point to execute on that as it's written and consistently be able to do the most important part of this. It's experience-based selling. If you can do all of those things, you can turn around to your client and you can say, here is what you're going to be experiencing over the next whatever period. Then you do those things. Then you follow up right away and go, did you experience the things I told you were going to experience? And the client goes, wow, I did. This is great.
Yeah.
That type of service delivery, which is what a lot of us in the industry call the Disney method, that really is that style of client experience and delivery. It is achievable. I have seen MSPs that do it. Our MSP, when I left, which has continued to grow, was really, really trying their damnedest to do that. The MSP that MJ from CompTIA, MJ Shure, sold his MSP to, they were doing that. That was literally their whole entire premise. There are lots of MSPs that manage to do that, but for all the ones that do, there's so many that don't.
Yeah.
But then they think they are. And it's funny because if you have this talk with an MSP, especially like a medium market MSP that does have the resources to do a little bit of this, they'll get this sort of visceral revulsion to this idea because in their mind, what I'm saying, it sounds systematized and almost commoditized, and they think that means it can't be high end. And so to bring it back to restaurants, what's a high end chain restaurant that typically gives a good experience? The Capitol Grill. That's a chain. That's a chain. I know for a lot of us, that's the fanciest restaurant we go to. That is a chain. That is a commodity-based chain at the upper end of the market. It is not a 2-star Michelin-rated restaurant in the middle of countryside of France. It's a chain. You can have very high-end and be a chain, and we can all like it. And on the flip side, well, who does the world love when things are on fire or flooding or snow? Is a Waffle House. I mean, the quality there is... But once again, we love it. Or like a Chick-fil-A is another good example of one that's famous for how they treat people. All of these are commodity products. So commodity product does not mean that you cannot deliver an experience that people will literally advertise for free on TV because of how amazing you are. Like these are not opposites, but our industry has decided they are and is very unwilling to have that conversation sometimes, which is super amusing because the only way to arrive at that Disney experience is by standardization and doing the exact same thing. Have you ever been to a Disney property where you've stayed at the property or on a Disney cruise? Like not the amusement park, the actual property?
On property once. Yeah.
And if you've had that sort of legendary Disney experience, did you ever bother to realize that they actually tell you no a lot more than they say yes? But the way they tell you no is by always redirecting you to the closest version of what they know they can do perfectly that would align with what they think you want. And so the entire time you're in a cattle funnel being shepherded down to one goal. but it's executed so seamlessly that you're like, wow, I chose this cattle funnel. This is amazing. Disney's the best.
Yeah.
That only happens by standardizing the crap out of everything and having one way it's done that's repeatable, that we can hold our employees to a standard on. Because then if I'm a Disney cast member, I don't think anymore.
Yeah.
Like the
You're
process, I don't think
program.
all I focus on is you, because everything else has been programmed in here. So I am 100% focused on the client experience. And that's why it's, you see the videos now with the Star Wars stuff they've done where like the stormtroopers, these people in these hot costumes suffering, walking around on their feet all day, always instantly are on for that kid or that adult kid, either to tease them that they're not a Jedi or give them that amazing experience. You're like, how do they do that? Well, they do it by, it's done the same way over and over and over and over. And so then all that person has to think about is every human I see, how can I make today the best possible day for them following that process? You could do that at your MSP.
Right. Yeah, I love how you started that by saying like you do have to think about the experience you're providing, because one of the questions that I became known for and probably hated for the most at the MSP leadership tables was the focusing question I would always use, regardless of the conversation, was how does this affect the client experience? Right? Didn't matter if it was vetting a new tool, right? And the tool could have saved us a bunch in margin and fixed a bunch of other shit, but it was like, how does it affect the client experience? And if we're really here to protect the client experience, then sorry, that's a non-checkbox, right? Like we're moving on to the next way to solve this problem, because protecting the experience we're providing was the most prestigious part of what we were doing. So I love that you anchored into that, and Disney was a good example of really delivering on that. The other thing that I heard when you were talking about chains, and I liked that you used both high scale, high end, low end, like the difference between Waffle House and Chick-fil-A and Capitol Grill. Like, let's just focus on the Waffle House and Chick-fil-A, because you're right. Like, they're probably the most, the patrons of those two are the most loyal to those locations or those places. And really it's about consistency, right? And like that's a psychological principle. It's like it's always the same, and they've done it well based on the routine that they execute. But the consistency is actually what we come to trust, which is going back to really the root of it all, which is expectations, right? And
well, so here's a fun party trick. What's the SLA at a Chick-fil-A drive-thru? Surely they must have
they've
one.
got one, I'm sure.
What is it? Do you know?
I don't know.
Is it advertised anywhere? No. What's the SLA at McDonald's? So internally, McDonald's has, I think it's about 4.5 minutes in a drive-thru, but that's not advertised. It's not an SLA. Right. You've never been promised there's a minimum amount of time you have to wait in the drive-thru. Right. But yet, as customers in a fast food country, all of us intrinsically have a number we know is the wrong number, even though none of these chains have ever done a 30 minutes or less pizza delivery thing for their drive-thru. There is no set SLA. What do we do as consumers based on our experience? We imply an SLA, an ISLA. Vendors and in this case, food service companies that we hold in high regard, whether they set the SLA or we set it for them, they always meet or exceed that. And when they don't, they're able to tell proactively they're not going to be able to, even though Chick-fil-A is not under any obligation to allow you to be there for 2 minutes or 15 minutes. What's a Chick-fil-A going to do? They're going to go send people out into the line of cars with portable order takers and start working down the line, because sure, that's operationally efficient, but it's also, they realize that there's a maximum amount of time our customers have decided without agreeing with us that they're going to sit in line. And if we don't do something to manage the perception of that, people will get mad. If that happens once a year, that's fine. We all get, even the worst consumer, we're not that unreasonable. We understand that people make mistakes. But if that happens every third visit, well, like for here, I got a Wendy's on the street for me. Every second or third visit, the drive-thru's wrapped around the building. I now think of that as the slow Wendy's. I now think about, do I really want Wendy's today? Because I don't want to go to the slow Wendy's before you've even gone there to see how long the line is. That's what ends up happening. Now you're the slow Wendy's. Now you've already taken a relationship and put it here. And so you've lowered that bar, and now your clients are expecting you to fail. And so they start looking for more failure points. So now I start going, well, slow Wendy's and my order's wrong. And then suddenly you churn. And you're wondering, why did this happen? We didn't technically do anything wrong. We never promised Dean that we had an SLA here. And sorry, we got one order wrong out of the last 1,000 Dean ordered. I don't order that much Mondays.
Yeah.
But that's how easily it happens. And an MSP has a lot more contact with their clients than a restaurant does.
Yeah.
And so you have so many more opportunities to basically highlight when you're not meeting expectations. And so that's kind of the second idea is stop freaking over fucking delivering.
Yeah.
Dear God, the amount of MSPs that over deliver. Like if I could just reach through the camera and slap them, cut that shit out.
Yeah.
Because an MSP that over delivers, they do it inconsistently. And it doesn't matter all the times you over delivered well.
Yeah.
It matters the one time you didn't.
Right.
And then you repeatedly don't. And this goes back to capacity and availability because we haven't thought about that, which is why we're over delivering. And you hit a relationship over and over again. If an MSP is watching this and they're like, "No, that's not me." You ever had a major downtime incident that was caused by what, your client not complying with your some shit where by the letter of the law, you're on the high ground and your team just goes above and beyond, works all weekend out of contract to fix it. Like you are literally a hero. You have done a Herculean effort to fix this client. On Monday morning, you excitedly call the client, everything's working. And the client is like, it's about time. Like everybody who's experienced that personally, that is a result of you inconsistently over delivering and the client having insane expectations, looking at that and being like, well, a year ago, you would have fixed that in an hour, whether that was true or not.
Right.
That's how easily that happens. You are better off delivering at a standard you can consistently execute with a smile than a standard that vacillates, where sometimes you're responding to things in 5 minutes with your highest level engineer, and the other times it's 4 hours and some schmuck on the first day in the office is doing it.
Right. That's so important and counterintuitive. I'll never forget the first time I heard those words fall out of my CEO's mouth at maybe like the third MSP I was at. I can remember the exact room I was in, what he was wearing, and what the hell he was trying to say when he said, "We're going to stop over delivering for our clients." And like, I fought him hard verbally for a while, like trying to understand, what do you mean? Like, first of all, we've built who we are based on over delivering. And like, now you just show up and say, we're going to stop over delivering. Luckily, unfortunately for me, he was always up for a debate. And so like, we worked through it, but that's ultimately what the foundation of that conversation turned into, which was, it wasn't about being what we would call flipping the heroic switch. It was about consistently, every single time without fail, delivering at an acceptable or just slightly above acceptable, like rate or position or experience.
And you can have it, you can have your cake and eat it too here, but there's a cost. And that's the part that I think a lot of business owners don't get. They don't really want to address that part. Like if Jeff, if I worked for you and you were like, listen, at SIFT, we are never going to let an email to the CS department sit for more than 2 minutes before it's responded to. And it's just one employee who responds to them. My response would be, if that is going to be the standard, we need to have the availability and capacity in our staffing to meet that standard. So here are the resources I need. And if you're like, dude, I'm not going to let you put 4 people in that department, for whatever our SLA is, like you don't have the resources that, okay, well then you can't do that, buddy. So what would be a more reasonable response time? And that conversation is really hard to have because you feel like you are delivering a worse experience for your clients. The whole white glove thing again, because you don't realize that, first of all, your clients didn't ask for that. In almost any case, your clients are not coming to you and saying 2-minute response time or you're fired. No one talks that way.
Right.
And so it's probably something you said that set that tone. Your clients didn't ask for that. Your revenue model doesn't support the level of service you're trying to deliver. But if you want that, then you got to price it and build it to deliver that. And who's got time for that? Which is why we see, and this is not an MSP problem. So we see as an all service industry struggle with this because it requires a level of strategy that feels antithetical to good customer service. And people emotionally can't get over that feeling, especially ownership level. They feel gross because you fall back on, well, when it was just me, I did that. Like, no, you didn't. You had 100% accountability and availability for any decision. So no, you did not always do that. It's just every time you didn't, you could instantly rationalize why. So you didn't see that as a problem. You know, like, oh, I'm out with my kids. Obviously, I can't work this emergency right now. Like, that's one thing when it's just you and you're the only person accountable to that. That doesn't scale. But what do we start the whole thing off? They're entrepreneurs. So most of these owners started with that modality. And now they're running larger businesses. And in the back of their minds, they still think that's going to work.
Yeah, that same CEO that was talking about stopping over delivering, I had a different conversation at a different time where the mentality is what you just described, right? The words came out of his mouth of like, we used to do anything for anyone. We would mow your lawn for you if you asked us to for $75 an hour, right? When you started the business, when you were T&M before MSP and recurring even existed. And like, that was sort of the Pavlovian effect of like the building of the company 10 years in the future. That was interesting to then see, you know, the conversation flip to we're gonna stop intentionally over delivering. And once I understood that, it made a lot of sense in that regard. The other thing that was sort of a light bulb for me when you were talking about the SLAs for McDonald's or Chick-fil-A's drive-through is like, well, one, I don't know the answer, but I actually don't think of those as SLAs as much as like what the MSPs lack, which is actual SOPs, right? Like, those companies probably look at the SOP of the drive-through as no order will sit on the order line for more than 3 minutes or whatever the time thing is, but as an actual operation procedure. And then there's all these micro things that happen in between to deliver that. And if that's true, that we really think about it in SOP fashion instead of SLA fashion, because I like that concept, is it points directly to one of the biggest weaknesses in the MSP's world, which is documentation, process, procedure, like structure.
Well, it's actually, there's an interesting psychological breakdown of what you just described. You're not wrong. It's SOP and the SLA together, and a customer's ability to use reasonableness to relate them. In an example like McDonald's, because McDonald's has had the same SOP, or a Domino's, or, you know, any business food, but any business like that has had the same SOP for so long, by enough generation of consumers, all of us have a general idea of what reasonable operation looks like. So in a situation, in that like uncommon situation where you are waiting a little long in the drive-through, where the SLA is being breached, you are able yourself to sort of filter that breach through the reasonableness. So maybe you're sitting there, you're like, they must be understaffed today. Or, oh, there's a long line, maybe they're a little backed up. Doesn't mean that you're happy, but your understanding of the gist of how it's supposed to work gives you a little bit of context to interpret today not working that way as they probably can't follow their SOP today because of condition. Okay, it probably isn't malice or incompetence today. And as long as it doesn't repeat over and over again, most of us get through that in our daily lives. Okay. Well, think about an MSP, like our industry. We don't have that. Our industry hasn't really accepted that everything we all do is exactly the same, and your MSP is not special, and you do not have a secret recipe for what you're doing. If you're watching this and you think that, sorry, it doesn't. Our industry hasn't accepted that. We don't have cross-pollinated standards. So our overall aggregate customer base is really only in second, maybe third generation of exposure to MSPs. We don't have that luxury. Like 30 years from now, we will. Our customer base will be more or less propagated to understand that there is a general way this is done. And, oh, today there must be a major downtime incident I'm not aware of. They're busy with that. Well, I'm not happy, but my printer can wait. Short of you communicating that to your clients right now, our industry doesn't have that luxury that food industry has, that other established industries have. And so you do have to overcompensate for that. And under delivering, or at least delivering at a repeatable standard, is one method. Communication is another method that is pretty universally acknowledged and still pretty universally ignored. That is one of the areas I do think AI has a lot of value to add. But then a lot of it too is being outcome oriented. In the absence of our ability to have a customer base that perfectly understands what we do, in the absence of our ability as service companies to really totally have our shit together, well, then you need to be thinking about what are the outcomes that you're providing. This goes back to that client experience. And if I can fall back on outcomes like Chick-fil-A, then that will make up for it. That's probably not a forever plan for this entire space, but like back to Chick-fil-A, lines too long, people want to order and then they want to eat. Let's send people from inside outside with portable pads so people can order. That's the outcome. The outcome I got in line for was to order. Now I've ordered. Now I know they're making my food. Now let's send runners out with the food. That is my second outcome. I've gotten my food. I didn't like that I didn't get to do it the normal way. I'm not happy, but I am pleased my outcomes are met. And in an MSP example, a lot of this comes back to very simple stuff. If you called me and you're like, Dean, I can't print, and it's really important, what's a typical MSP going to do? They're going to do impact urgency triage of that, maybe ask a couple of questions, put you in the queue, and then when they get to you, take a good shot at fixing it. Maybe they'll fix it in 5 minutes, maybe it'll take an hour. That whole time you're not able to print. But maybe that wasn't your outcome. What if the actual thing was, Dean, I can't print in this color purple and I need it in 30 minutes for a presentation, or I need to know it won't be a thing. Well, how many MSPs are taking a minute to figure out what the outcome is you want? Because then the difference in triaging that, me on the phone, when you tell me that, or I figure that out, it's gonna be like, listen, I know for a fact there is no way in 30 minutes I'm going to get that printer to print in that color purple. I can probably fix it, but not in 30 minutes. Do you have a Staples or a Kinko's near you? How reasonable would it be for me to help you get this PDF on a thumb drive, get it printed there? Maybe like, no, I don't have that. I can't do that. Okay, well then we're definitely not going to get you that color purple in 30 minutes. What can I do right now to make you as prepared for that meeting as you possibly can be, so this purple thing isn't an issue? And then we will work on it so that it's not an issue for you next time. That's outcome based.
It's huge.
And you're not happy. That's people don't understand this. You're still not happy. You wanted purple in 30 minutes. You are not getting purple in 30 minutes. But that wasn't the real outcome. The real outcome was being prepared for your meeting. I can get you that. And so now your life isn't as interrupted. You move forward. You can make a risk assessment, a value assessment, move forward with it. And you don't look back at that and think about that time your MSP lost you a $200,000 deal. You think about it like that time that your MSP did a really good job helping you work up with a creative solution so you didn't lose that deal. And then maybe you're a little aggravated, and I use that in the QBR to talk about why that black and white printer is never going to print in purple, you idiot, and then get you a proper printer. And wow, it's almost like a relationship. And it's so weird, you know, that our industry just sort of glasses over all of that.
They don't see not that they don't see, they mistake they mistake identifying the actual problem, right? And that's ultimately my interpretation of what you're saying. One of the things I used to coach to on the ops side, because I learned it the hard way when I was in ops too, was that the ultimate objective, like the thing beneath any ticket, wasn't that we needed the ticket to be resolved or to solve the problem that was stated on the ticket. Like the most critical thing that we needed to do through the balance of all of that was to give the person, the end user attached to the ticket, the information they need to make the best business decision they can now, in the process of like reestablishing them to baseline, right? But like the example you gave was great, especially with the printer, because everyone hates them, but it's real. And like that person, it was really about how can I work towards the outcome you're going for, and knowing that that particular outcome is unrealistic or impossible, at least in this situation. Like, what else can we do? What other business impact and business decision can I offer to help soften the blow, versus just like realizing it couldn't be done and let the SLA blow off anyway, as an example. And that was such a different way. Difference, not the right word, but it was a people way of looking at the problem versus, you know, a process or tech way.
And think about, I know we're coming up on time, but
Do you have
think
a hard
about this.
stop or no?
I don't.
All right.
Think about this operationally. What is, so I work for a training company. What is the biggest, back to hiring, thing we hear is I can't find good talent. When you break that down, what they really mean is I can't find experienced high level techs. Like in this case, I need somebody that remotely can diagnose, troubleshoot, maybe color correct, print off documents. Like I need somebody who can do all of that. Well, if you look at it from my point of view, no, I don't. Like that isn't worth solving for. I don't need a resolution to the technical problem. I need somebody who can be empathetic, who can understand that you are probably already in a panic and stressed out because you shouldn't have waited till 30 minutes before your meeting to do this anyways. Most humans, whether they admit it or not, are not so stupid to not be aware of the own consequence of their own actions. So I need that. I need somebody who can understand how to ask you a couple of non-technical questions to figure out what you're trying to do. And I need somebody who, given that, on their feet, can pivot quickly and either point you in a direction that is useful or can let you know that we probably won't be able to point you in that direction within this time frame. Here are some options. And that's not a T3. That's not somebody with a bunch of certifications. That's somebody who's just really good at managing people, which probably is coming from like, I don't know, like a Nordstrom's, maybe the cell phone kiosk at the mall, the Chick-fil-A we talked about. Like that's a way lower level person. And it's a person who has a slightly different skill set. On a disc profile, that's somebody who's got I and then probably S or C above the line. And so suddenly the type of people I need to do the bulk of my support cost less, are more malleable because they're not some other MSP's ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. I realized that the majority of the work I'm doing to support outcomes, especially if I'm proactively designing solutions around those outcomes, it's actually probably 85, 90% of it can be done by an L1. So my effective rate, my agreement efficiency, all of that increases. Oh, what's that mean? If I keep the same profit margin, I have more money now to start thinking about staffing for availability, which I wasn't before. Maybe I do overstaff a little bit so the phone never rings more than twice now. And like suddenly all of this opens up to you and you realize even at a relatively modestly small MSP, maybe I've been going about this the wrong way the whole time. If I'm focusing on the experience, if I'm focusing on outcomes, and if I, as the owner or the VCIO or whatever, am suggesting, installing, and selling based on outcomes, it's reasonable that most of my clients will be aligned for that. I don't need a room full of 120,000 a year people before even we get into benefits to do this. In fact, I kind of maybe don't even need to have anyone in the room that's Palo or Juniper certified. In fact, why were we selling Cisco Catalyst? We don't need that to arrive at the outcome. And like, it's this eye-opening moment where you're like, all that stuff that I was sort of derisively calling trunk slammer stuff for years. You know, maybe like unify stuff, like maybe I could arrive at those outcomes with a lower level of gear. Maybe I could arrive at that with a lower level of person. Maybe all of the things I thought were important are not quite that important. And then you take that and you scale it to your verticals, right? You apply that logic. So if I'm in Manhattan selling into fintech, okay, maybe I do need to sell Palo Alto because the buyer is going to want to see a Gartner Quadrant rated product. But that's a sales decision now. That's not like an operational constraint I put in front of myself. It changes your whole perspective. And it's really interesting. That is a huge part of why we grew pretty much overnight from 10 people to 300 people was that shift in thinking. And if we look at most of the MSPs we've seen have really rapid growth and roll into PE, most of them adopted some translation or version of that idea. It's not simple, but it's that simple.
I can speak from experience too. We leading the sales team, so I saw it from the other side, but it was the same conversation with the same decision. Is like the stack is not the stack is not the stack when the customer can get the outcome they want with something at a quarter of the price. And then we also don't have this CCIE issue where we only have 2 out of the 100 people. Like now we have 80 people that can support the thing, right? So it's just like we unintentionally put ourselves inside the box that we hated being in. And once we started tearing down those walls is where we saw the hockey stick, come into play.
Well, there's so many fascinating tactical implications too of thinking that way. So if for a smaller or medium-sized MSP, so if you're somewhere, under 1 million to probably like 12, 15 million, I would say the easiest way to do this is do pick a single stack and try to impose your stack because that is just easier. But that doesn't mean that's the only way. And one of the things that a lot of MSPs forget, we see this a lot online from medium maturity MSPs that are starting to get this. They'll explain that like you need to standardize your offering for your clients, and they're right. But what they leave out is standardization doesn't always have to mean buy my thing today. And if you approach it from the total client lifecycle, we were an MSP that came in during discovery. I would be able to figure out very quickly, because we had a really great process, exactly what needed to be replaced. And then I would just hawse that for you on the front side, no debate. And you either say yes and you're a client, you say no and we move on. That's a high maturity level.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go from here to here. There are happy zones in between. And one of those is like, let's say your MSP just says, listen, if there is a battery backup unit in your office, it needs to be accessible from my office, and we set it up one way. I don't care what brand it is, but there's one way we set up those battery backup units with one way they report and one standard there. So as long as you meet that, if I'm an Eaton shop and you're an APC shop, don't care. Maybe we say, listen, a edge device has to be in warranty and have a subscription. And then beyond that, we set it up one way. If we can set yours up that one way, we're not going to hassle you about replacing it right now. Eventually, I'm going to try to align you to my standard. Yeah. But suddenly, individual product expertise is less relevant, because now I only need to know how to configure something one way. Right. And what that ends up meaning for the rest of your team is a smaller number of high-end people can start to propagate that knowledge down. So now, sure, I might still want a level 2 or a level 3 to set up every managed switch to our standard. But our level 1s now, who maybe a normal MSP would not allow to go into the running config of a managed switch, well, if they know there is literally only one way, whether it's a Netgear, TP-Link, Cisco, Unify, Meraki, there is one way we set it up, one way we label things, one way alerting works, one way we set up VLANs, like all of that is identical, where you could come in and be like, oh, that's Dean's MSP, like that level of setup. Well, that goes in a document. And now any idiot can look at the document and look at the picture on the screen or the CLI and be like, this matches or it doesn't. It doesn't, ding, ding, ding. We have a problem here. Or it matches. We don't have a problem here. And that person doesn't even really need to know what the words mean. Yeah. And that is becoming more common, but I say all of that because if your MSP can approach your clients that way, that is fine. That is fine. Stack alignment on 1 or 2 stacks that you manage is probably better long-term, but that middle zone, that is fine. And if you go from not doing that to doing that, that's a great place to be. You can build a very large company on that. That's very operationally stable. And you don't have to feel gross that you're telling everybody who comes on that they have to switch from, one brand to another. I do think that is easier, but you don't have to. Yeah. And I wish more MSPs understood that standards don't have to be me coming in with a baseball bat, breaking your legs because you have the wrong color box in your office. Yeah. Standards can be more, you have a server. Well, I don't want to roll a truck, Jeff, because that's the most expensive thing I can possibly do. It's a high opportunity cost. And whoever I sent on site has to perfectly represent my brand in the absence of my control. And we'll fuck all of that noise. Yeah. So my standard could simply be that if it's core infrastructure and I can't manage it from my office, it's not acceptable. And we need to align that. So like a server that maybe was never bought or configured with IPMI or IJAC or ILO. Okay, well, then we're going to provide an IP KVM, or we're going to provide, one of those new like single IP jump boxes. Well, my client would never buy that. Don't ask them to. Then at the front side, know that my total cost to bring on a new client, I need certain controls in place. If they have the gear for it, I don't have to dip into my new client budget, but otherwise it's my stuff, with your MSP's name on it, my property, my IP PDU, my jump box, because I need that there to manage you at our standard. It's a different way of thinking. But if you're able to think that way, well, we get back to outcome, I can control those now. So like, let's say that core piece of infrastructure is having an issue and it's not my brand, but I've made sure that I've either put in equipment like an IP, PDU, or KVM, or aligned your gear to match my standard. Gone are the days of, hey, Jeff, you got a key to the server room. Can you go be my smart eyes and hands in the middle of the day? I don't need that. I already have the ability to do that and then call you and say, I've already done these things and we're going to have to send somebody on site. Or we call the power department. We think you have a pole down in your area. We're not gonna be able to do anything for you, buddy. Like it's a totally different way of approaching it. I didn't dump a T3 into that. I didn't send somebody on site for 5 hours to research. None of that shit adds value. So the client doesn't like any of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the stretching of the thinking that the audience will hopefully take out of that, where when you sort of strip things down to first principles thinking and focus on the outcome, the thing that I witnessed is, and I say it all the time, but there's like two predominant mindsets or personality types in this space. One is, here's the 100 reasons why that won't work. The other is, how can I make that work? And the best outcomes I ever experienced was when those two came together. And how can I make this work? Asked one of the, here's the 100 reasons why it won't, the question, and then they gave a perfectly pristine answer. Like, well, what if we just put an IPKVM in there? Boom. Yep. Okay, great. Amazing. And I like that you called out essentially what we're talking about is standardization doesn't have to be on the color of the box. It can be like standardization at the configuration level, right? The intent level, the outcome level, not necessarily the don't like Fortinet
that
white.
Outcome level's important there specifically, because security people tend to think they're doing this, where they'll be like, well, there's a security standard or control we have to meet regardless of the box. And they go overboard the wrong way because they lose sight of the outcome. So you do have to remember you're standardizing for an outcome. Hopefully that means you're also bringing in standards for quality of support and safety and security.
Yeah.
But no one's hiring us. I give you a different example, like lawn care. If you hire a lawn care service, first of all, hilariously enough, go Google or go on YouTube and Google how to start a lawn care business and watch like one or two of those videos. And you're like, holy shit, this is exactly how you start an MSP. Because it's the exact same business model down to the detail. But think about like, if you ever had like a professional lawn care service come out, they're outcome focused. They're not giving you reports on how many blades of grass they cut. They're not talking to you about like they use Husqvarna versus John Deere. Like maybe at a large scale, they might lightly advertise, we have the level of equipment to handle your type of job. But it's very, 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 very astroturf level of that. They come out and they produce an outcome, but they also don't break your legs over the standards required to get the outcome. So if I bring on a lawn care company, I have a dog. So I want a green lawn, nicely manicured with no holes, that's safe for my dog. They're going to keep doing that and hopefully keep it at that standard. And as long as I see that outcome, I don't care. Like I appreciate it, but I don't care. If they came to me, and this is where I say the outcome's important. If they came to me and they were like, listen, this chemical is the only chemical that we can use to get the color green that we hold to our standard. So you can't put your dog on your lawn for a month and we already applied it. Fuck you. Like, what did I tell you is my outcome? I have a dog. Like I could have worked with you if you wanted to rotate parts of my lawn, but I can't use my lawn because you brought in some asinine standard I don't understand. So that is not the right way to do it. And in lawn care, we generally don't see that. They will be like, oh, you have kids. Listen, we're going to have to do the left side this week. We're going to put flags up. We'll do the right side a week later. In the meantime, try to keep them off. They won't die if they go on it, but, not healthy. And that entire industry is based around service, repeatable service at an outcome level. And tying it back to one of my other pet peeves we didn't talk about too much on this call, but that idea of like going on site or off site or anything. Do you know the names of the people that are coming to cut your lawn?
No.
And I don't mean that in like, that you're racist or too wealthy to care. I mean that the relationship by interacting with them as they perform the service is irrelevant as long as the outcome is being arrived at. You probably wave and say hi. If it's a hot day, you'll buy him, bring him out some drinks. Like, there's no reason you can't build a relationship. They don't require that to deliver value. And MSPs think that is the value. They think the blades of grass cut and the relationship while cutting them is what I want. I don't want it. I love if they're friendly. I would notice if it was the same guy who came every year for a year and then it wasn't, I would notice that. But like, I want an outcome. And if you're able to think of it that way, and remember that your standards still have to be outcome oriented. They can't be standards for the sake of standards, which the entire compliance and security part of our industry needs to get the fuck over themselves on. You can arrive at a place where someone will just keep paying you money forever, just forever. They don't care because you're making it happen. My grass looks beautiful. I need a company. Your grass looks beautiful. Mine doesn't. My neighbor's does. His is
Yeah.
There's a little grass war
This
in
is
the
always
neighborhood.
green and there's no holes.
Well,
And
he
his
does it
dog looks
himself because
happy.
he's really, really, really into it.
Yeah.
And he has all the gear to do it. Now he does it for my other neighbor, and I refuse to join in
Yeah.
because I'm stubborn, but I
Right.
really should because my grass looks like shit compared to theirs. But
yeah. But you know, you'd have to change
Yeah.
the expected outcome, I guess.
Yep.
Probably in that regard. Cool. You want to go into the hiring stuff, or you want to call it good?
yeah, we can talk about that quick.
All right, cool.
So everything you heard us talk about over however this gets edited, a lot of it actually supports this concept that as an MSP, your goal, you really shouldn't be caught having to hire highly experienced people to bring on your team. Yes, I understand that there is sort of a minimum critical mass of experience necessary to run a competent service provider. And for many of you, the owner fills that until they don't. And then you probably have your safety blanket employee who has been with you forever that fills that void. Short of that hand waving away, an MSP that is spending a lot of money trying to find highly skilled resources is failing. And most of the hiring issues we hear come from that. It comes from small to medium MSPs that are approaching hiring the way they would have approached it 20 or 30 years ago, trying to find people that cost more than they can afford, therefore underpaying people who know they can leave at any minute to get a pay raise, who also bring bad habits and opinions as trained by other MSPs. Our entire industry, if I could make a slightly off-color reference, is obsessed with this idea of basically trying to date other people's girlfriends, thinking that that is somehow a good way to start a relationship. And as common sense would dictate, that is probably not a good way to start a relationship. Yeah. If you do a lot of the stuff we talked about already on this call, the level of person you need to hire is much lower. And your ability to train them is also a lower burden, because now I don't need to teach that person everything I know. I need to teach them how to treat people and how to follow a process, which is far easier. And that means that person can cost less money. It means I have way more of an opportunity to move them through a meaningful career that they are genuinely grateful for and will actually manifest a little bit of that fictitious loyalty we all convince ourselves our employees have. And if all of that then gets updated for the fact that it's 2025, it's not 1952, a job is not a gift, when you're not doing me a favor by hiring me at any level anymore. That has been dead since the 80s, but the old guard of business advice still propagates that. A job is a relationship. It is a contract. You approach it fairly and openly, which you're now able to do because you have a clear understanding of what the person's going to do, and you don't expect every employee to be a catch-all for everything. Suddenly this barrier of I can't find any talent is removed, and you realize that like when I put a job out, and when I was working with Helped and advising with Helped, which is like a tier one white label outsource, like we are only hiring my first MSP job level people. I could put out an Indeed job there written correctly and have hundreds of people apply in 2 minutes, and then schedule 50 to 70 interviews of excellent quality where I had the problem of I want all of them. It is absolutely not a problem to find talent in this industry. We have more people who want to work in IT than we have ever had want to get into a single field since maybe other than nursing in the 80s. There are so many people, and whatever flavor of person you want, any background, any gender, any identity, there are so many people who want a job in IT. There are more people who want a job than there are jobs open. Even when we see big companies doing layoffs because that's their way of managing capacity and availability, there are so many employees. So if at your MSP, you're like, I can't find good talent, it is 1,000% a you problem. You are fucking it up. There are so many people and they're good. And if the people you are bringing in are not performing, you are not approaching hiring correctly, you're not approaching training correctly, and you probably don't know what the fuck you're doing, which I know I sound like angry about it. I don't blame anyone for, because most MSP owners are not professional HR people any more than they are professional salespeople, as we both know. You like to fix computers and you stumbled into a business, and it's one of those skills that you're sort of forced to learn that most owners get like C- level at good at doing. It's also why you'll notice that if you have a larger MSP in your area that has a proper like HR department, that they don't seem to magically have this problem. Like they'll have open recs open, but they don't seem to whinge and moan that they can't find any talent. So it is very, very solvable for, if we have the time, I can go through tips and strategies, but
Yeah.
I don't want to like talk your ear off for another hour.
No, we're good. Let me check, because I think that's going to capture someone's head and be like, yeah, I'm good on time. You don't have to go through the entire encyclopedia version if you don't want, but like, let's leave them with something tactical and practical, because they're like, you know what? I don't like that he's cussing at me, but he's right. And so tell me, Dr. Zoidberg, like, how the hell do I fix my problem?
So I had this conversation with Eric Anthony a couple weeks ago. The first place where we kind of started this, are you hiring for capacitor availability? You got to figure that out first. In most roles, if you're hiring for availability, the level of person you need is lower than if you're hiring for capacity. Generally speaking, there are some roles, or if you're hiring the only person in that role, that does not hold up. So if you're hiring your first outside sales rep, you probably do need somebody who has a certain idea what they're doing. And that'll be true with a technical role as well. So if you are bringing on the first human in a role your company has ever had, you are making up for your lack of experience training, managing, and developing that person by overhiring. Assuming that's not the problem we're solving for right now, then availability or capacity is important to figure out first, because that denotes the level of person and some of how you can frame things. The next thing you have to figure out is, are you throwing a job description on Indeed, or are you actually making a job ad? And this is the second place I see most people fail. This is an advertisement. This is selling. You are selling. And that outdated mentality of a job is a favor, the candidate needs to sell themselves to you. That's not how the world has worked since before most people watching this were born. It doesn't work that way. And if you think it does, you are lying to yourself. It is a two-person relationship. You have to sell you. You want the best people to apply? Make the most engaging job advertisement. And what would you tell somebody if they were shopping for new clients, right? So first thing we would say, well, it can't be everybody in your market. And if you're TCP, if you're like, oh, it's, 10 computer companies with an hour of me, well, that's not an ICP. So who's the ICP you're hiring for? In that case, who's the ideal client profile? What's the ideal candidate profile? Who's the human you want on your team? Not the skills, not the experience. Who is the human being that fits in? Because an MSP who is probably somewhere with either just the owner as the manager or has like somewhere less than 10 management professionals, I'm going to go out on a limb and say nobody in your company really knows how to manage people because it's an ad hoc skill. So you have to hire somebody that you're capable of managing, not figure out how to become capable of managing the people you hire. So you need to know you. Like in my case, I'm talkative. I have a high D personality. I get angry really quickly. I tend to make a lot of jokes. I'm very disorganized. Well, I need somebody that can positively respond to that style of management if I want them to be successful under me. That's not their fault. If I hire, some quiet church mouse of an employee that doesn't want to engage and doesn't have some drive and doesn't like to meme at work, when they're then disengaged and don't follow my instructions, that's my fault. My fault. So you need to figure out who are the people you're capable of managing. And there's no shame in this. There's no shame in this. No one is good at managing everybody. So figure that out, develop an ICP for the ideal candidate profile, and then put that, for the love of everything, put that through in the job. It's an advertisement. If it is some dry, boring, canned corporate nonsense, cut that shit out. That's not what day-to-day is like at your company. Bring that through in the ad, because you want a human being to have an emotional reaction immediately and be like, that is me. That is where I want to be. They're talking about me. So you got to start with that. One other thing I would mention about the job advertisement: don't play games. This whole idea of interview games is nonsense. It is like fictitious alpha male nonsense. This is not the time for that. This is not the time for any of that horse shit. You put the salary range, put it honestly, put it openly. If you think you're going to save a buck by negotiating, get the fuck over yourself. What are you willing to pay? And that's important because if no one responds, the number's not right. And you won't know that unless you put the honest range, put all of the job functions on there honestly. If there is an on-call and it's not paid well, that sucks. Put it there. The right person who wants a shot, who likes you, might be willing to tolerate that. And I'm a big fan. There's another reason for doing that. I'm also a big fan, a little bit somewhere buried in this. Put an Easter egg in. Put something that is absurd, a non sequitur that only someone who read it is going to see. Because the next part of all this, once you post a job ad, is you are going to get a lot of responses, and ain't nobody got time to go engage through hundreds of applications. You got a business to run. So being able to go in and quickly scan for who noticed the Easter egg, they go to the top of the list. Being able to use the canned messaging, same way you do a sequence in sales in Indeed, to go and ask a couple questions like, hey, what was the posted range on the job that you applied for? That's your first checkpoint to make sure this person understands that you're only willing to pay them, $65,000 to $70,000 a year. It shows you that they read, shows you engagement, helps you filter through all the noise. You eventually get to that point. You schedule those first interviews. If you can, I like doing 2, but if not, a good part of that interview should be basically a culture fit interview, and you reframe interview questions around that employee. If I ask you, Jeff, do you like to work well alone or in a group? You are going to curate your answer based on what you think I want to hear. So we don't ask you that. We start off the interview with like, Jeff, I am so excited you're here today. I had a chance to look at your resume, and there's a bunch of stuff I want to ask you about. I'm so glad that you took this appointment with me. But before we get into any of that, tell me about some of those bottles you have behind you. And actually, I see some nerd stuff in the corner there. What's up with all of that? What are you collecting there?
Yeah,
what
like an actual genuine.
No, but seriously, what's behind you? What are those figurines?
There's a handful of things. One is Hulk Hogan from it's a bobblehead Hogan from the his restaurant down in Clearwater, I think it is. For when I was down there at a peer group with a couple of good people, and then the bottle is Blanton's because why not? And it's always within arm's reach too. Well, the wrong arm, but arm's reach because you never know when you're going to need it.
All right.
And then what else is back there? Some 7-figure MSP stuff from having some fun with Chris at one point. And then the books that made it on the bookshelf, right? There's a whole bunch of other books over there that didn't make it to the bookshelf.
So just based on that, what do I learn about the candidate? Well, first of all, you understand that appearances matter. You curated the book collection to give me a certain idea when I see you on camera. You maybe have an appreciation for wrestling, so I want to touch point on that. And you have a relatively high-end alcohol with 2 glasses. So all of that frames me up to ask a bunch of boring interview questions in a non-boring way. It's like, Hulk, are you into wrestling at all? Like, you have Hulk Hogan. Like, did you ever follow wrestling? Was that a passion of yours?
Yeah, when I was a kid, but I was a Scott Hall fan.
All right. Yeah. So was that typically like like Monday Night Raw or the one I'm forgetting, the big yearly one was on. Was this a like you by yourself set up on the couch, bowl of popcorn, or was this like you and the homies get together because we're going to go nuts and watch our favorite people beating each other up?
Yeah, it started off as me alone on my own doing it, but once I became a WWE kid instead of a WWF kid, then there was a band of brothers, and it became like, hey buddies, we get together every Monday night to watch it.
Did you guys ever act out any other wrestling?
I didn't, but there was a different group of friends that did the backyard wrestling. Yeah.
So if you were with that group, were you the referee, the commentator in the ring, or were you just a fan?
I was the hype guy on the outside, making sure everything was crazy, but not putting my body through it.
Awesome. Yeah. One other question before we get into the interview. I noticed, seems interesting to me, on camera you have 2 glasses there. Is that because you expect somebody might be in the room that you want to share a drink with, or is that more just like because that's kind of what we do? We have the cancer in the 2 glasses.
Yeah, no, for me, like drinks are best shared than they are alone. So I want to be prepared for that.
So a bunch of stuff from asking questions that way I learn about you right away is that you're comfortable working and doing things on your own, but you're also comfortable navigating groups. You're comfortable in a social setting. You enjoy doing things socially, but you also clearly have passions that you like on your own. That's great. I figured all that out. I also found out, totally wasn't planning to ask this, that you clearly understand the concept of being able to sell or put a persona on, because you said you were the hype man.
Yeah.
And hype man's job is to be able to quickly elevator pitch what's happening. And that was your chosen role. And it's like already I learned all of these. That's like 10 interview questions I don't have to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get more authentic answers, and you're more likely to have fun talking to me because we're talking like regular people.
Yeah.
And so approaching your interviews that way, where at
Mm-hmm.
every stage of the process, the candidate feels like they are winning, where there is this constant sense of, I was right to apply. I was right to be pre-screened. I was right to take that call. And maybe they're even thinking, wow, no one's ever talked to me like that in an interview. You are psychologically, I know I said don't play any games, but you're psychologically setting somebody up. Basically, this is reciprocity in sales, to be super freaking pumped to talk to you, which means you're going to get the best version of them, and you're going to get an honest version of them, which is the one you want when they work there. And so if that's not manifesting, then you don't need to go to a skills interview, because this person just isn't going to manifest into who you want, no matter how good they are at tech.
Yeah.
And that approach is really, really helpful, because you'll also get people that start to become obsessed with this idea that no one has treated them this way before. And they want that badly.
Right.
And so you can get somebody who's like, especially if they make it to the skills part, who does not have the skills you need. You can now use that to explain to them, listen, I cannot hire you for the $70,000 a year role. You just quite simply do not have the experience or skill demonstration based on us talking that I need in the role, but I love your passion. I really like you. We have this other role that is at a lower level of pay that could transition into this role. Is that something you'd be interested in? And you're far more likely here to get a genuine answer versus somebody who just needs a job, who will clearly communicate either, I like you, but no, sorry, I really need to be at that pay level. They'll be honest now. You've established trust.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, be like, I wasn't planning on that, and that's going to be tough, but this sounds like the best opportunity that's ever come across my door. What do I need to do to show you that I could deserve that role? And now that person's programmed from the beginning to be engaged in you, your Kool-Aid, everything you're doing. And that's all the shit the MSP struggles with anyways. You've just removed that entire barrier. So now when that person starts, if you just quite literally don't fuck up being friendly and kind and not lying about your core values, they almost certainly will, by their own motivation, succeed at some level and be far less likely to just churn out in their first year when they actually start being useful to you, because you've established trust. And if you keep doing that, if you do what you say you're going to do throughout their entire relationship, this is the employee that comes to you instead of like 2 weeks before, where they're like, hey, I just bought a new car, so I need a raise. And you're like, oh shit, I can't give you a raise right now. Fuck. All right, here's my 2 weeks notice. This is the employee that comes to you like 6 months before that. My wife and I have been talking a lot that we can't keep sharing one car, so I'm going to start car shopping. Do you have any ideas? And now you're like, all right, this person's going to cost me more money in a few months. I need to now. I have some time. You're like, hey, yeah, let's talk about that. But, like paying for a new car, like that's really going to, create an additional financial burden on you. Have you given any more thoughts to that PD plan we talked about a few months ago? Do you want to start on that? You want me to like meet with you one-on-one a week? We can start getting you so you can increase your salary so that you can afford that car. And now that employee is like, once again, holy shit, no one has ever spoken to me like this before. And you're just building this trust over and over again. The person may leave you someday. This is the person who leaves you as a net promoter. This is the person who goes to their next job, and their next job, first of all, goes, holy shit, you're amazing. Where did you learn to be amazing? Oh, I learned it from Nathan at ThinkTech. He was my first MSP boss. He was the best boss. I love working there. Well, why'd you leave? Well, the size company they were at, they just couldn't keep pace with my career, but I love them. They're so cool. If they could have afforded to keep me, I probably would have stayed there. We just couldn't make it work out. I love them. They're great. We should figure out a way to, find a way to do something cool with them. Like, have a net promoter out there in the world, which that's what we want when we churn anybody, client or employee. We want somebody who leaves on terms where they're still net promoting us because it was a positive predicted churn. Well, you want that with your employees. You're not going to keep employees forever, MSPs. Like, I'm sorry, it's not a thing. But now you've reframed this entire thing where you're proud that your baby is off in the world, wings spread, doing cool shit. I have employees to this day I still keep in touch with that are doing all sorts of cool stuff. And when they left me, I was sad. but
Yeah.
like, I'm so proud of what they do, and we stay
Right.
in touch, and you have all these relationships now,
Mm-hmm.
and they look back at you as somebody that helped them start a career, and you look at them as people who taught you important lessons,
Yeah.
and all this toxicity is removed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you suddenly realize hiring isn't very scary or very hard to do properly. Maybe I can do this.
Right. There's so much of everything you just demonstrated over the last, whatever that was, 15 minutes of the example that is so parallel to success in sales as well.
Mm-hmm.
All
It's
the
the
way,
exact same
it's
stuff.
the exact same stuff. Why? Because it's people and people. It's human to human. And for the awkward or uncomfortable tech person that is the seller too, like, just go back and look at the persona that Dean put on when he showed up to the interview call. Right, there was a presence to that. He brought the energy. He raised his voice a couple of decibels. He noticed my environment and asked me questions as if I was interesting, not that he was interested. And the way that he kept digging layers deeper, like, you can do all of that based off of the icons on someone's background, the shit that's on their desk. When you do that, if you can go on the office tour before you get to the conference room, like, soak up the environment, but be curious and lean in and bring a different level of presence. And
the absence of all of that can be like, hey, Jeff, I noticed you literally have nothing behind you. And normally when I get on calls with people, they either have a virtual background or like their house. Like, wait, are you in like a product testing room? What's up? Is that Vanta Black? Like, what's going on there? Like, anything can be a conversation point if you just genuinely show a certain level of excitement that person in that moment is the single most important thing happening, and that your only joy in that day came from the fact they chose to allow you to interact with them.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing you said, which I think I'll restate because it shouldn't be lost, is the premise that you set for the relationship that you built, right? And the person and how they show up for the rest of the relationship, whether it's 1 year as an employee or 10 years as an employee. But the person, the representative that shows up as a result of the relationship, and like the trust, the vulnerability, the essence of the relationship, like, you're going to get the best out of that person the whole time. And if you're going to fill the seat anyways, wouldn't you want to fill it with someone who's going to give you their best all the time, every time?
Well, and I'll quickly give two employee examples. I had a guy who worked for me for years, Justin. We actually started it around the same time, and he was my first service manager I ever trained, and my biggest project. I actually moved out of my office, sit next to him for about a year and a half, because that's how much attention he needed, and I learned a lot from that. Anyways, when we rolled up and we became a big PE MSP, there was not going to be room for him to move up into a service management role for a while. I could see that. He was a perfectly loyal, happy employee, very well liked. I could see that this move means that his career is going to be in stasis for probably 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And I know he will happily go along with that. And that's horseshit, because we've built trust. So I was like, Justin, we need to find you a service manager job somewhere. Like, it will happen here eventually. It's going to take too long. Like, let's get you going. I went to some of the MSPs that I was friends with, found him an MSP that I knew culturally, the attitude, the way the owners thought about stuff would be a good fit, introduced everybody. Justin did the rest on his own. Justin's their service manager now, and he's fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of him, even though I lost probably the glue that held that office together by intentionally sending him out. But now that means I have a executive team at an MSP that thinks very favorably of me and I have a great relationship with. I have somebody I trained out there training more people the way I train them, building a whole unit down in Orlando of Dean people, which there's all sorts of Machiavellian things you could think about there in terms of acquisition, expansion. I had another employee, Brandon, who was kind of my right-hand man for years. He was my automation. He was the reason I didn't need Sift, because he was my human version of Sift. I could give him a business problem and he would find a way to automate it or script it. Same thing with him. He told me one day, he was like, my dream job is to work for Emibot. And Brandon was someone who's very valuable to me. I'm like, no, you're not leaving. But I started the conversation with Emibot back then, unbeknownst to Brandon, telling them about him, selling him to them. And Darren over there was like, well, I don't need anybody right now, but I'll put a pin in that. Brandon and I, around the same time, left the MSP. He went and got another MSP job. And then about a year passes and Darren follows up with me, contacts Brandon. Brandon now has his dream job over at Emibot,
Yeah.
which Brandon, I didn't get him the job. Brandon earned his job.
Right.
But the point is, like, you can propagate your influence in an industry by treating the people around you well, even if sometimes that means you are hurting yourself in the short term by allowing them to leave. The net result is, like, I have people all over the space that look at me as a trusted friend, a trustworthy person because of this.
Yeah.
And so from an operational, a business, a pragmatic standpoint, it also behooves you, even if some of these people eventually go to a client or a former client, you are spreading out people that know how to do things right, that respect you, know you're good on your word, that are net promoters, and they're people that you're helping, especially as an employer, you're helping them move their lives forward.
Right.
There is currency there. And now you have tools that you can use, especially if you're in a market where you feel there's a lot of competition, very saturated. This is one of the best ways to overcome that, is to basically get people that you made excellent in all your competitors and all the clients, not because you're going to go do something evil and shitty, but simply because now everyone realizes, like, hey, your company's pretty good at what it does. And other people will start to self-select and be like, you know, you sound like you'd be a better prospect for my friend's MSP down the street. Because I hired a few of his employees. I know what his clients look like. I think we're good. They are way more dialed into what you need. Let me go make an introduction. People like doing that, even to their competitors. So if you needed another reason to approach hiring and employee development this way, it has a longer tail benefit to your company.
Yeah, that's awesome. And with that, I'm not going to open any other cans of worms, but I am going to ask you kind of the how you can ruin someone else's day question.
Yeah.
So as we move to the next episode, what is the one question that Dean would leave behind for the next guest?
What is the single biggest thing that pisses you off about the MSP industry, and why haven't you done a fucking thing to solve it?
Oh, can't wait to open one with that heat. Love it. Dean, thank you, first of all, for coming. Thanks for giving me the extra time and the audience the extra time. If people want more tough love from Dean, where do they find you? How should they get a hold of you?
Well, I'll yell at you for free. I have a YouTube where I post a lot of this kind of stuff. You can find me on Reddit. You can find me on Discord, Dr. Zoidberg. I'm on LinkedIn at Dr. Zoidberg. But realistically, if you want a more toned down and helpful version of me, come over to Empath. You don't have to be a client. Just find me over at Empath, Dean at Empath MSP. Our whole thing is helping MSPs upskill because it's going to solve a lot of the other problems we've talked about on this call. And we all mean that, and I mean that. I'm a big fan of, if you have a problem, in 30 minutes of my time will point you in a direction. The way you're going to pay me back for that is you're going to pay it forward to the next person that you run into that has that problem. That is the only way this industry will grow up. So I am very, very big on, you don't put a dollar value as a gate to that. So if anybody listening to this has questions, wants help, just reach out to me. I'm happy to help you because I know at some point you will enhance the life of someone else in our channel by passing that forward.
Awesome. Again, everyone, if you liked what you heard, take them up on it. That's really how this community has been built so far. I know my personal experience has been that way. So get ready. Tune in for the next episode. Thank you again for watching MSP Insider.
Thanks for having me.